It was a day like any other until the blue and red lights flared behind Emily Carter's car, casting streaks of color across an empty road. At just 15, Emily was a good kid, hands steady at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, just as her father, James, had drilled into her since she first got behind the wheel. Be polite, keep your hands visible, don't give them a reason, he'd told her, words born from a lifetime of caution. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't swerved, hadn't done a single thing wrong, yet there she was, heart hammering as Officer Patricia Hensley approached, her boots striking the pavement with a rhythm that felt more like a threat than a routine stop. No greeting, no explanation, just a curt license and registration, delivered with a hardness that made Emily's stomach tighten. She handed them over, careful to move slowly, her hands trembling despite her calm exterior. She knew the rules. She'd followed them to the letter, but Officer Hensley didn't seem to care about rules, not the ones that mattered anyway. "Step out of the car," she ordered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the warm afternoon air. Emily hesitated, a quiet "why" slipping out before she could stop it. That was all it took for Patricia's lips to curl into something cold, something dangerous. "Step out," she repeated, and Emily obeyed, stepping onto the asphalt, the heat radiating up through her sneakers. What came next wasn't just a traffic stop, it was a power play. Patricia circled her like a hawk, eyes narrowed, asking, "Anything in your pockets?" "No, ma'am," Emily replied, her voice small but firm. Then came the pat-down rough hands pressing into her jacket, her jeans, searching for something that wasn't there. Nothing turned up, but Patricia wasn't done. Her flashlight swept the car, landing on Emily's thick curls tied back in a ponytail, a feature as much a part of her as her brown eyes. "You carrying anything in your hair?" Patricia asked, her tone laced with suspicion so absurd it made Emily's stomach churn. "It's just my hair," she said, stepping back incredulous. That's when Patricia crossed the line no one saw coming. Her face twisted, and before Emily could react, she yanked a fistful of those curls and sliced them off with scissors from her belt, one jagged, ruthless cut. The crowd that had gathered gasped, phones already out, capturing the moment Emily's world tilted. Shock swallowed her as she stumbled back, clutching what was left of her hair, while Patricia held up the severed strands like some kind of prize. "Now we'll see if you're hiding something," she sneered, as if humiliating a teenage girl in broad daylight was part of her job description. For folks who've lived through decades of seeing power misused, whether in the 60s marches or quiet injustices, since this wasn't just a traffic stop gone wrong, it was a stark reminder of what happens when those sworn to protect us wield their authority like a weapon instead. The moment Officer Patricia Hensley sliced off Emily Carter's curls, the air shifted not just for Emily, still reeling on that sun-baked asphalt, but for everyone watching, phones in hand, hearts racing with disbelief. What had started as an unjust traffic stop spiraled into something far uglier, a raw display of power that left Emily clutching the jagged remains of her hair, her dignity stripped away in front of strangers. The crowd's gasps turned to shouts, "You can't do that!" But Patricia stood there, scissors gleaming, smirking like she'd won something. She hadn't counted on the phones, though, or the way those videos would spread like wildfire, and she certainly hadn't counted on James Carter, Emily's father, a man who'd spent his life fighting battles most folks only read about. 15 minutes after a kind stranger, Linda Hayes made the call. "Sir, your daughter's been assaulted by a cop. Come quick." Tires screeched against the pavement. James stepped out of his sleek SUV, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, suit crisp like he'd just walked out of a courtroom, his presence alone dropping the temperature on that tense street. "Baby," he said, crouching before Emily, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of her shame and rage. "Are you okay?" She couldn't speak, tears welled, her hands trembling, but James saw it all, the scattered curls on the ground, the fear in her eyes, the crowd still filming. His jaw flexed, and when he turned to Patricia, the calm in his voice was the kind that made people nervous. "What's your badge number?" he asked, each word deliberate. Patricia tried to dodge. "This is an active investigation," but James cut through it like a blade. "That's not what I asked." She squared her shoulders, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed her. She knew who he was now, a lawyer who'd taken down bigger fish than her. Backup rolled up, Lieutenant Robert Fields stepping out, his face tightening as he clocked the scene. A teenage girl violated, her hair littering the pavement, a growing crowd buzzing with anger. "Officer Hensley, what the hell happened here?" he demanded. James didn't wait for her excuses. "Your officer detained my daughter without cause, assaulted her, and mutilated her hair all on video. That's a problem, wouldn't you say?" That was just the beginning. James didn't stop at words. He turned the fight for his daughter into a war for justice. Not just against Patricia, but the whole system that let her run roughshod for years. By noon the next day, he stood before a sea of microphones, Emily beside him, her head high despite the uneven patches where her curls once hung. "My daughter was humiliated by someone sworn to protect her," he said, voice sharp but controlled. "We're suing Patricia Hensley and the department. Every complaint they buried, every kid they let her hurt, we're digging it all up." For those of us who've seen too many wrongs swept under the rug, James's fight feels like a long overdue reckoning, a father's love turning pain into power, one courtroom step at a time. James Carter had lit the fuse, vowing to hold Officer Patricia Hensley and the entire police department accountable. But it wasn't just his voice that turned Emily's pain into a reckoning. It was the people watching, the ones who refused to look away. Back on that asphalt where Emily's curls still lay scattered, a small crowd had already started to hum with outrage. Phones were out, shaky hands recording every second of Patricia's sneering defiance as she dangled those severed strands like a trophy. "That's assault!" a man bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "She can't do that!" a woman cried, her words sharp with the kind of anger that comes from seeing too much go wrong for too long. Those videos, grainy at first, but unmistakable, didn't stay on that street corner. They hit the internet like a thunderclap, shared and reshared until number Justice for Emily was trending nationwide by morning. For folks over 50, who might remember a time when injustice stayed quiet unless you marched for it, this was something new. A single moment, caught on camera, sparking a fire no one could douse. The crowd didn't just watch, they acted. Linda Hayes, the stranger who'd called James, stayed by Emily's side, her steady presence a lifeline, as the teenager sat numb on the curb. Others kept filming, zooming in as Patricia's smirk faded, and Lieutenant Robert Fields arrived, his face a mask of grim realization. "Hensley, turn in your badge and weapon," he ordered, his voice tight. And the crowd cheered not loud, but fierce, like they'd waited years for this. That video spread beyond phones to TV screens, news anchors dissecting it on split panels, civil rights groups amplifying it with calls for action. By the time James stood before those microphones at noon, promising lawsuits and investigations, the story wasn't just his or Emily's. It belonged to everyone who'd hit share, everyone who'd typed a furious comment or whispered, "Enough is enough," to a neighbor over coffee. Patricia hadn't seen it coming. She'd banked on the old ways: intimidate, control, walk away. But this wasn't the old days. The community's eyes, armed with cameras and a platform, stripped her power bare. When Fields took her badge, it wasn't just his call, it was the weight of thousands watching, demanding she face the music. For those of us who've lived through times when a cop's word was law and a victim's cry went unheard, this shift feels seismic. It's not just about Emily anymore. It's about every kid who's ever been wronged, every parent who's felt helpless. The crowd and their phones turned a father's fight into a movement, proving that when people stand together, even in pixels and hashtags, they can topple the untouchable. James might have started it, but the community and their unrelenting voices made sure justice wasn't just a promise, it was a demand no one could ignore. The wildfire of justice for Emily had swept the nation, fueled by a community that refused to let Officer Patricia Hensley's actions fade into the shadows. Phones buzzed with notifications, TV screens replayed the grainy footage, and voices online and off demanded accountability until Lieutenant Robert Fields stripped Patricia of her badge right there on that tense street. But amidst the roar of the crowd and the echo of her father, James Carter's promise to sue, Emily Carter sat quietly, the weight of what happened pressing down like a stone on her chest. She'd been a good kid, followed every rule, kept her hands visible, stayed polite just to have her hair, her pride, hacked away in broad daylight. For a 15-year-old, that kind of violation cuts deep, leaving scars no one can see. As the video spread and the hashtag trended, Emily didn't feel like a hero or a symbol. She felt small, exposed, her hands still trembling as she avoided touching the uneven patches where her curls once bounced free. Yet something shifted in those raw, ragged hours after the crowd dispersed and the news vans rolled in. Linda Hayes, the stranger who'd called James, had stayed close. Her soft words, "You're stronger than this, sweetheart," planting a seed Emily didn't even know she needed. Her father's fight gave her a shield. The community's outrage gave her a megaphone. But it was Emily herself who had to decide what came next. By the time James stood before those microphones, vowing to take on the whole department, Emily was beside him, not just as a victim, but as a voice. She stepped up, shoulders squared despite the ache in her heart, and spoke. "This shouldn't happen to anyone," she said, her voice steady even as emotion flickered at the edges. "But it does too often to people without a video or a voice. If you see something, say something. Don't stop fighting for better." The crowd erupted, not just in cheers, but in a wave of recognition that this teenager, bruised but unbroken, was claiming her power back. For those of us over 50 who've watched the world twist and turn through decades of struggle, Emily's stand hits hard. She could have stayed silent, let her father carry the torch, but she didn't. She took the pain Patricia inflicted, the humiliation, the loss, and turned it into a call that echoed beyond her own story. It's the kind of grit that reminds us of the kids who sat at lunch counters or marched in the streets, refusing to let injustice define them. Emily's not just fighting for herself, she's speaking for every soul who's ever felt powerless under a badge, every parent who's ever feared for their child. Her Kian Kwong, forged in a moment no one should endure, proves that even when they try to break you, you can rise stronger. That's not just a win for Emily, it's a lesson for us all, a spark to keep pushing, no matter how long the road. Emily Carter's voice rang out that day, strong and clear despite the cracks of emotion, a 15-year-old turning her pain into a rallying cry. This shouldn't happen to anyone. Standing beside her father, James Carter, with the crowd roaring its support, she'd taken the first step to reclaim what Officer Patricia Hensley had tried to steal: her dignity, her power. But James knew this wasn't just about one moment or one officer. As Emily spoke, he saw the bigger fight, the one that stretched beyond that sunlit street where his daughter's curls hit the pavement. He'd promised to sue Patricia and the department, but his sights were set higher on a system that had let Hensley run unchecked for years, burying complaints like they were yesterday's news. For folks over 50 who've watched too many wrongs go unpunished, James's next move felt like a page from a playbook they knew well. Don't just fix the symptom, uproot the disease. At that press conference, with microphones crowding his face and Emily by his side, James laid it out plain and sharp. "My daughter was humiliated and dehumanized by someone sworn to protect her," he said, his voice a controlled burn. "But this isn't just about Patricia Hensley. It's about a department that protected her, ignored every complaint, every kid she hurt. We're demanding a full investigation, every report dismissed, every file they thought was dead and gone. If there's a pattern of abuse they let slide, we'll take this beyond a civil case." The reporters scribbled, the crowd murmured, and somewhere in the back, a woman nodded like she'd heard this tune before. James wasn't bluffing. When Lieutenant Robert Fields had stripped Patricia's badge, it was a start, but a start wasn't enough. He wanted the whole machine torn open, every gear inspected, every rust spot scrubbed clean. The courtroom became the battleground. Packed with seniors, activists, and families, it buzzed as the prosecution piled up evidence, not just the video of Emily's assault, but testimonies from others Patricia had roughed up, scared silent, or brushed off. The judge's ruling hit like a gavel on stone. Her actions were egregiously abusive. I'm recommending termination and charges. But James pushed further, pressing Fields for records. How many complaints had been filed against Hensley? How many had vanished into thin air? The lieutenant squirmed and James pounced. "If you've been protecting her, if this department's been shielding a pattern, we'll find out." For those of us who've lived through decades of "that's just how it is," this was more than a lawsuit. It was a demand to rewrite the rules. Emily's courage had lit the spark, but James's fight aimed to burn down the walls that let injustice fester. It's a slow, hard road, one folks over 50 know too well, but it's the kind that can change everything if we keep pushing, keep watching, keep caring. James Carter's fight to overhaul a broken system had taken root. with the courtroom victory over Officer Patricia Hensley marking a hard one step forward, her badge gone, charges looming, and a promise to dig up every buried complaint. But as the gavel fell and the crowd cheered, it was clear this wasn't just about one lawsuit or one family anymore. Emily Carter's courage and her father's relentless push had cracked open a door, and now the community, those folks who'd filmed, shared, and shouted for justice, stood ready to kick it wide open. Outside the courthouse, under a barrage of flashing cameras, James and Emily stepped forward together, not just as father and daughter, but as a beacon for something bigger. For those of us over 50 who've seen too many battles fizzle out when the headlines fade, their words carried a charge, a call to keep the fire burning, to make sure this wasn't just another story that slipped away. Emily spoke first, her voice steady despite the uneven patches where her curls once were. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "But it does too often to people without a video or a voice. If you see something, say something. Don't stop fighting for better." It was a simple plea, but it landed heavy, a teenager's wisdom forged in pain, reaching out to every soul who'd ever felt powerless. James followed, his tone firm but warm, the kind of voice that could rally a room. "This is about every child who's been hurt, every complaint ignored," he said. "Share this story. Keep talking. Silence lets injustice win, and we've seen too much of that already." The crowd didn't just cheer. They nodded, pulled out phones, whispered to each other like they were signing an unspoken pact. For folks who remember when change meant marching arm in arm or passing out flyers, this was a new kind of rally, one where every share, every conversation, built the momentum. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. The message rippled out, from courthouse steps to living rooms, from seniors who'd lived through segregation to neighbors who'd never thought twice about a traffic stop. Emily and James weren't asking for pity, they were handing out a challenge. Don't let this fade. For those of us who've watched the world shift over decades, it's a reminder of what we've always known. Nothing changes unless we make it. The Carter family turned their pain into a torch, but it's up to us to carry it, talking over coffee, calling out wrong when we see it, keeping the pressure on. Silence has been the shield for too many Patricias, but this time, the community's voice is loud, clear, and unrelenting. It's a lesson from a 15-year-old and her dad. We've got the power to demand better, and we can't stop now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.